Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, and I've never been to NTC before, so it's really fun. I'm seeing some old friends and meeting new friends, and it's really lovely. Jamie Hall, an old friend of mine, and Poncho here is an old friend of mine, so it's really been fun. So thanks for having me. I thought we'd start off with a little music. That's what we're here for. And so I'm going to play a little piece for you. It's kind of a Thelonious Monk tune. You probably have not heard it. He wrote a lot of songs that we don't hear very often. And in honor of my New Mexico friends, this is actually called Gallop's Gallop. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll keep this really informal, and I just have some notes here. Everybody have a handout? If not, we can get some more. I started teaching in Eastman about 19 years ago, and I thought I was pretty organized. I thought I had it together pretty good. And then I got to Eastman and I realized I didn't, you know. And my students realized it too. And so I kind of had to regroup. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And something that really helped me in my teaching there, not that I've got it together or anything, but it really helped me, was to approach teaching and my own musicianship by thinking in terms of two words: depth and clarity. So I was experiencing some of my students at Eastman who were really good. They would question some of the things we were working on. And my initial, they'd say, well, why are we working on this? And I'd say, because you can't do it. That's why, you know, but that wasn't a very good answer. So something that really helped me was to realize that the more depth we gain in our musicianship, the more options we have. And the more options we have, the more choices we have. And the more choices we have equates to the more freedom we have as artists. Now, I'm speaking as a musician, as a trumpet player, but really that's applicable to anything. A lot of you guys, a lot of you young people are here, and we're so thrilled you're here. And we know you are having a great time, and you're playing the trumpet, and you'll probably do something else when you go to school or something. But being a trumpet player pays off so much because you learn discipline, and you learn camaraderie, and you learn friendship, and you learn teamwork. So everything I say today, I'm speaking as an old jazz trumpet player, but really I'm hoping to speak to everybody, young people that may, you're thinking, I'm not going to be a musician, but it's so applicable. So please know that I'm speaking to you too. So when we're talking about going for depth as a musician, as a trumpet player, as a jazz trumpet player, there's so much stuff to cover. I kind of listed some there. Your tone and your technique and your tune knowledge and your knowledge of the history and knowledge of the styles and your high chops and your knowledge of tunes and your knowledge of harmony. It just goes on and on and on and on, right? So there's a lot to cover. So I'm just going to touch on 2 or 3 things just as an example of trying to get more depth as a musician, as a trumpet player, as a jazz trumpet player, as a trumpet player that likes to play all kinds of different styles, okay? So we're going to talk about, the first thing we're going to talk about is sound or tone. Now, I'm really blessed at Eastman. The man right across the hall from me is Mr. Jim Thompson. He's the guy right across the hall from me. And I hear him practicing sometimes, and I think, I'll make mine into a lamp. He's amazing, right? He's one of the finest drum players I've ever heard, and he's really respectful and generous and very respectful of the whole jazz idiom. But I hear him practicing sometimes, and I'll think, that's got to be a recording. And then I'll hear him flub something, and I'm like, dang, it's not. It's him practicing. He's really great. So he and I've talked about this a lot. Are you guys familiar with Jim Thompson? He's really quite some. He was in the Atlanta Symphony in Montreal. So he doesn't like to call it sound. He likes to call it tone. So I'll go with that, all right? So in terms of gaining depth with your tone, I like to think of it in terms of gaining so many aspects. You get so much depth when you work on depth of tone. And how many of you were at Ashley's Masterclass yesterday? It was really great, right? She mentioned some things about getting down inside the sound, and Jim Thompson really gets down inside the sound. And she said something about having her tuning slide come in a little bit as she gets stronger. And Jim Thompson's tuning slide's out about that far. He's so down inside his pitch. So what we want to do is we want to, as jazz musicians, I feel like we need to have a good classical sound. We need to be good classical drum players, really. We really do. Some instruments, that may not be true. For drums, a great drummer doesn't have to be a great, mallet player, right? Or a saxophonist may not need to be a really good classical saxophone player. But we as trumpet players, if we're going to be good jazz players, we need to be pretty good classical players. And as the music evolves, it's much more demanding. And we also owe it to the legacy of Louis Armstrong and Clifford Brown and all the other great jazz artists. We owe it to that legacy to be good trumpet players. And I think that starts with being good classical players. So I went to school at North Texas. I studied with John Haney. And I've studied with a lot of great teachers. I had John Haney, Jimmy Stamp, Boyd Hood, you and Ray, I should be killing as many good teachers as I've had. But I'm still like you guys. I'm just still trying to get better, you know. I'm trying to get better every day. But I did study classically, and I wasn't that great at it. That's why I'm sort of, you know, I'd get too nervous to play classical music. And I realized, oh, in jazz you don't notice your mistakes, so maybe that fits me better a little bit. But and thinking back about talking about your tone, getting down inside your pitch is really important, and having that classical sound, I think, is imperative to be a jazz trumpet player, because if you have depth of sound, you can have a lot of sounds, plural, right? But if you have a real brittle sound, your sound's going to be that's going to be your sound. And then I kid my guys, you know, oh, you want to play a solo? Oh, you're going to grab a flugelhorn. Why is that, right? Because you don't like your sound. So I think it's really important to have depth of sound. And when you have that depth of sound, you can get other sounds. You get my point there? So that's going to kind of be our theme throughout this talk today, just going for depth. There are other aspects of working on your sound that I know has helped me. I mean, a lot of my practice is spent on my sound or my tone, because I've realized, and we all know this, that if your sound is right, you're probably playing the horn right. When your sound is, when your tone is what, you know, for lack of a better word, full of harmonics or dark or whatever. What did Jim used to say? He didn't like dark. Overtones? Yeah, overtones. You know what I'm talking about. But you know, a good classical sound down inside the middle of on the sweet spot of the note, right? But when we have that, when we're on that note, our accuracy is going to be better, our endurance will be better, our high range will be better because we're not lopping off the upper register. Our intonation will be better. Everything gets better when we work on our tone. So I tell my students, everything we work on is a sound exercise. No matter what we're doing, if we're spelling chords or we're working on scales or we're working on heads of tunes or whatever, everything we do is a sound exercise. Okay, so that's one way to really think in terms of I'm always working on my sound, and I'm kind of hanging my hat on that. You're not wasting your time if you're doing tone exercises. And we can get, if you have some questions about that, I'm going to leave some time for some questions at the end. I'll show you some things I do to work on mine. And I work on it all the time. Now, I used to live in Los Angeles. For 20 years I was in Los Angeles, and I got to play with Wayne Bergeron and all the guys. And Wayne had a nickname for me, Clam Jenkins. That was my nickname. Lovingly. And then he'd pick up my horn and say, I got a big 3B mouthpiece, and he'd say, what are you doing playing this? You know, he always gives me a hard time. But yeah, but I mean, if somebody's going to make a mistake, 40-piece orchestra, somebody's going to miss a G in the staff. Who missed that G? Clam Jenkins, you know. So for me, when I lived in Los Angeles, my accuracy suffered because I think it was because of my sound. I don't think I was down inside my sound enough. And so that has really helped me. So it's helped me, it's given me more depth as a trumpet player, working on my sound, and it's given me more sounds, okay? Now sounds, or tones, as a jazz player, there's no jazz sound. There's a lot of jazz sounds. So a good example is Miles Davis. Now don't let anybody tell you that Miles Davis wasn't a good trumpet player. Miles Davis was a beautiful trumpet player. He wasn't virtuosic like some people we know, but he was a virtuoso musician. And he was a marvelous trumpet player, and he had so many sounds within his sound. So he might go, instead of just playing one sound, which is totally fine, but he might do something like this. With that too, right? With the water in there. He could get all those colors because he had a real beautiful center on his pitch. somebody asked him one time, he said, is it true that you don't practice? And he said, well, that's ridiculous. Of course I practice. How else would I get my sound? Right? So tone is an incredibly important part of our musicianship. And if we go for depth of sound, literally, then we get a lot of options and choices. Okay? Well, the next thing I have on there is groove. All right, now, I mentioned last night at the concert, I was blessed to spend, well, I've been in the Clayton Hamilton band. Have you heard the Clayton Hamilton Orchestra? It's a really great band. I used to be the youngest guy in the trumpet section. Now, that's not true. I'm the oldest guy in the trumpet section. I've been in that band for 34 years. And for 26 of those years, I sat right next to Snooky Young. And Snooky Young, if you haven't, some of you young guys might not know who Snooky was. He was the godfather of lead trumpet playing. He played lead with Basie and Thad and Mel and the Tonight Show Band and Mingus and, you know. He was a marvelous lead trumpet player, and he was a marvelous soloist as well. When he was with Basie, just a little background here, he was with Basie. He had just been with Lunsford, and Lunsford's band was more of a two-beat band. But when he got with Basie, it was a 4/4 thing, and Basie's groove was totally different than Duke or Benny Goodman or anybody else. It was much different. And it was a very important time for our music because the band had a different feel. And who was playing lead tenor? Lester Young. And who was playing lead trumpet? Snooky Young. And who was the singer? Billie Holiday. I mean, it was a really important band. And who was listening to Lester Young? Charlie Parker. So the groove of the Basie band was so important to the music. It switched over Duke's band. The more modern guys really were influenced by Basie's band. And when Snooky played lead trumpet, he set the stage for the groove. And something I learned from Snooky was this statement. It's not my statement. The drummer, Ed Soph, really put it in these words. The accent gets the dynamic. Let me say that again. The accent gets the dynamic. So before Basie, it was more downbeat heavy, you know. Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, Benny Goodman, even early Duke was more downbeat heavy. Da 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 da. That was a swing thing, right? And that's what I hear from a lot of young people that are starting to play jazz. They're putting that accent on the downbeat. If they're accenting something, they put it. Or string players, when they're trying to swing, they put it. Heedle, hodle, 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 right? That's not the swing feel. So something to practice to get your groove better is to think in that terms of accent having the dynamic. If you're playing at a mezzo forte, the accent is mezzo forte and everything else is softer. Okay? So a good thing to work on. So we're talking about putting the accent on the upbeat generally. Okay? So let's just kind of slice and dice the groove a little bit. I don't like to do this, but I feel like if there's one thing I can kind of speak to, it's groove, because I sat right next to Snooky for so long. And I asked him about it, you know. And he didn't like to talk too much, but the accent getting the dynamic, Snooky wouldn't play. Everything wouldn't be loud like that. It'd be right? The accents are on the upbeat. The downbeats are long. And generally speaking, it's with a D syllable. Okay? So those three things, just to kind of hang your hat on, working on a more modern jazz groove. Because we had a lesson at Eastman. This young lady is at North Texas now. She was a flute player in high school, and then she became a trumpet player. What were you thinking about? And then she was at Eastman and just tore it up, and now she's getting her doctorate at North Texas. But we talked about this, right? And just that idea of getting the accent. It's a kind of a tricky thing to get, I've learned. A lot of people kind of struggle with this thing. So here's a couple of exercises to try, and I'm going to slice and dice it a little bit just so you can have an idea of something to practice. So let's take Clark 2. Okay, everybody know Clark 2, right? Right? Now let's slur 2 at the same time. Okay, everybody with me? Okay. Now let's tongue the first 2 and then slur 2 at the same time in groups of 2. Can you say that for me? Ready? Go. Da, 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 da. Very good. That's the trickiest part. Now, one couple little things. The first note, play it softly. It's not, right? Because where am I putting the accent? Downbeats, thank you. If I play the first note softly, and then the accent is on the upbeat, we get this. Right? You get it? So three things. I'm playing at mezzo forte, but whatever volume I'm playing, the accent is that volume, and everything else is softer. Snooky could play, at the age of 90, I kid you not, he could play for 4 hours. He could play for 4 hours, no problem, because everything wasn't going loud. The accents were loud. Everything else was softer. Now, an interesting thing, when Snooky played solos, he was more downbeat oriented. He was more about Buck Clayton and Sweets Edison. He was a little bit more downbeat oriented. But when he played in the band, Basie or Thad, I mean, they were all the most swinging bands, right? And the Clayton Hamilton band. When he played lead, it was so swinging. It was crazy, crazy swinging. And I just realized one day, man, I am so lucky to be sitting here sitting next to him. And he was such a dear, sweet guy anyway. He was really a gentle soul. So I learned that from him. So going for depth. Now here's another little way to do this. Take the tongue out of the mix and just make it breath accents. But where are we going to put the accent? On the upbeat. So three issues here. Accent on the upbeat. The accent gets the dynamic, and it's legato. Well, 4, and the downbeat's really long. It's not this. Right? Now, I have students, they'll do this. I'll give them this exercise, and they'll go, okay, I got it. Ready? And I'm like, nope, that's not it. Or, no. So you've got to keep those 3 or 4 things in mind. The downbeat's nice and long, and it's a da syllable, generally speaking, right? And the accent gets the dynamic, okay? So that's a little thing to just kind of work on your groove, because I would say I feel like that's one of the things I speak to best, and it's one of the things that I notice is the biggest problem in terms of getting your jazz phrasing going. I said on here how to play and what to play. We're not going to talk too much about what to play in here. I'm not going to talk about what to play on a G7. I'm still trying to figure that out myself, you know. But how to play, the groove is so important. And your sound is so important. And you'll find, this is a little bit of a tough concept, but you'll find when your groove gets better, your sound gets better. And when your sound it gets to where you want it to be, your groove can get better. So you start to feel the swing in your sound, and you start to feel the sound in your groove, which is really fun. But it really takes, I think it takes some diligent work at it, because it's a totally different feel than what a lot of you, if you haven't played much jazz, it's a totally different feel than what you're used to. Now, we talk about swing, and some people say, nah, it's a swing. It's not old. It's very modern. Hip-hop swings. Rap swings. Oh, it's got a little shuffle to it, right? Modern stuff, there's lots of real modern swing, and it really comes from the basic thing. and really kind of comes from Snooky Young in a lot of ways. So to my way of thinking, of course, I'm a trumpet player, I'm biased, but still, I really feel like a lot of the depth of swing came from that band, Basie's band. It was really important. Duke's band was important compositionally, and I would never take anything away from Duke's band. I mean, he was one of the greatest American composers. But the groove, to me, is attributed largely, I think, to Basie's band. Okay, so when you work on depth of groove, okay, I like to think I want to get down in there as deep as I can. I want to get in there, and that way I can hook up with this drummer, and I get a chance to play with some really great drummers, and they all have a different tip on their spangling, as we say. You know, their ride cymbal is a little different, so I feel I can get inside. But if I don't have that depth of groove, I can't. Now, sometimes in Los Angeles, I learned, you know, you might. Well, depth of groove gives me grooves, gives me more options, right? So if somebody was to say, "Hey Clay, it's swinging a little too hard. Could you make it a little more West Coast or more cool school?" They never said that. They never said, "Could it swing less?" I never had one person say that to me. But if they had have, I could have said, "No problem," right? I think for students, if they can play Basie, now I'm going to go out on a limb here. Forgive me if I'm just sort of a little bit, I don't want to say closed-minded, but I do feel strongly about this. If a student learns how to play Basie right, I think they can play just about anything. I think they can play modern music. You can play, I feel like you can play just about anything, but the opposite is not true. If you start playing other kinds of music, you know, like real pop music, and try to play Basie, it's not going to work. But if you work on getting Basie, that gives you depth of groove, and then you have other options. Okay. So sound and groove are my two things that I'm no harmonic genius or anything like that, and I'm still working on so much stuff. But sound and groove are the things that's the how. God bless you. God bless you, Jamie. But when we talk about jazz education, jazz clinics, a lot of times what are we talking about? A lot of times it's what scales to play, right? And that stuff's all important, and I work on it every day, and I have my students working on it every day. But if you're not playing with a good sound and a good groove, you know, you're not going to be interesting to me as a player. If I don't like somebody's sound, and if I don't like their depth of groove, I'm not going to like their playing, you know. So, two things to really work on. I don't want to cover all these things, but those are two things that I really would talk about. Now, one thing I left off on this inadvertently, I just was in a hurry with this soundtrack, this thing, is another thing that I really suggest you, if you want to be more interested in being a good jazz player, is to learn more about the blues. Because the blues permeates through all American music, right? Country, pop, R&B, gospel, hip hop. You know, I bet 20% of the Beatles tunes are blues tunes, and I love the Beatles. But they're all rock and roll. It's so much of the blues. And where does the blues come from? Where do the blues come from? They come from our African American tradition. That's where it comes from. From field hollers, work songs, secret codes, gospels, spirituals, right? And then it's mixed in, jazz is mixed in with European harmony. But the blues are so important to our makeup as musicians, especially jazz musicians. But I can't name one jazz musician who's not a good blues player. I can't name one great jazz musician that's not a good blues player. And I had to kind of take a step back. I've been on the Clayton band a long time, and I wasn't getting to play very much, and I was like, maybe I should leave. I actually said those words, and my wife said, "You're crazy," you know. She said, you play the way you play because you've been sitting next to Snooky Young all those years, you know. And I thought, well, she's right. She's right again, you know. And so I I had to be honest with myself. Now, okay, I'm a player. I've been working on, but I was not as good a blues player as I should have been. So I went back and I did some real homework on some blues, and I listened to some blues, and I really dug into it. Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson and Blind Lemon Jefferson and Stevie Ray, right? There's some great rock and roll guitar players that are really good blues players. Great, right? So let's talk about some depth of blues now. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but some things to think about as blues players, because it's kind of a fun way to get started getting your vocabulary going. I would say start at the blues, because if we're gonna get some vocabulary, the easiest vocabulary in the world to get is blues vocabulary. And guess what? You'll be using it the rest of your life, because we don't ever seem to get tired of it. Now, I don't call it licks. I don't like that word. To me, it's disrespectful. I call their nuances and their little statements, the gestures, but I don't like to call them licks, But if you'll get some blues vocabulary in your soul, right? And you turn into a sound exercise, right? But they're so easy, little blues things. Right? Just little blues things. They're so easy to grab, right? Then grab one of those things and learn it in a few keys, learn it in all 12 keys. A little short little thing, because if they're short, you can make it your own. So little snippets, little gestures, right? Now, one of the most important things in a blues is the form, right? So if you're playing the blues, and say you have a song and it goes like this. It goes, I lost my baby and I don't know what to do, right? The next line, notice there's a period right there. That next line is not going to say, I like ice cream, That's not it. That's not what's the next line going to be? I said, I lost my baby and I don't, right, exactly. And then the third line on the last 4 bars might be the answer to that. It's okay, I lost my baby, I don't know what to do. I lost my baby, I don't know what to do. And it might be something like, it's okay, I'll find someone new, or something like that. Or something. Or it might be, the same thing. That's called a riff blues, when it's the same thing. But we have a tendency when we're playing the blues, and I was the worst culprit. I'd say, I lost my baby, and I don't know what to do. And the next line was like, I'm thinking about buying a Mustang or something. It was just that it didn't have anything to do. So if I'm playing a blues, right? So you hear it. 4 chord. Okay. So just so you have it. So instead of and see, I'm just rambling now. So I'm not playing the blues form. Not that you have to do it every time, but get to where you can play. Right? There's nothing earth-shaking in there, but you feel where that I'm making a statement, I'm saying it again, and I'm putting my period on there for the little lady in the back of the church to go, oh, I don't know if I'd have said that or not, Oh, and then you say it again. Well, okay, I know how you feel, right? So you can't. It's that call and response thing. You got to put that period on there and leave it for the drummer to react, or for the piano player to bang play that chord, or the person listening can go, oh, and then you say it again, and then you get the listener involved, because the listener is thinking one of two things. What's going to happen next? Or when's this going to be over with? And if you ramble, that they're thinking the latter. you know. So you want them to, I lost my baby, don't know what to do. What's coming next, right? You say it again, ooh, what's coming next, right? So, and it's so easy to get that going, right? You could start today and learn just one little gesture off of a nice Eric Clapton record or something, right? It doesn't have to be anything, because he learned it from the guys before him, right? I think a great source to go is B.B. King. I mean, he played so simple. Oh my goodness. But it's just so like, holy cow, you know, so great. So check out some blues people to get some blues vocabulary, because that's where the jazz vocabulary came from. And I tell my students, now, after we're doing that, let's play the blues all the time. Let's do the same thing on any tune. Make a statement. Stick with it, right? Instead of feeling like you have to go, you know, dodge around. And I mean, that's one way to play. It's more through composed playing. But I kind of like to hang my hat on something and stick with my ideas, okay? So try to be better blues players, and it gives you some depth as a blues player and a jazz player. And then you have more choices, okay? All right. Now, okay. I'm trying to cover a lot of stuff here. How are we doing? If you have questions, I want to leave room for some questions. So we'll definitely have room for, and please help me out, because I can only talk so long, you know. I like to work on difficult stuff. Find some stuff that is pushing you around a little bit, be it a gesture or a tune. We'll talk about tunes in a second. But I think it's really important to work on stuff you can't do. And I tend to not write it down. But I work on kind of hard stuff, you know. One time I was practicing this thing, and I was struggling with it. And my wife said, "That sounds hard. What is that?" "Why is it? That sounds really hard." And I said, "Well, it's the second inversion of the diatonic chords of the double harmonic scale." And she said, "That is so sexy when you say that." Say it again. Yeah. She didn't really say that. But I wish she'd say that sometime. But no, but it's, you know, I work on stuff that pushes me around, because when I make mistakes, and I feel like my ear gets just a little bit better. So I do work on pretty hard stuff. I don't sound that good when I'm practicing, right? Just like you got to practice stuff you can't do, right? That's how you get better. Now, a couple of words on practicing. You know, I have young guys, and I grew up, my dad was a trumpet player, and he was pretty strict. And he told me one time, he said, you know, it's sort of like brushing your teeth. He said, you know, only brush the teeth that you want to keep. That was his. So you don't have to practice every day, just every day you want to eat, you know. That was his favorite saying. And he was serious, you know. He wanted us to practice. And I thought, hey, if all I have to do is practice to get along with my dad, who was very strict, I'm good. You know, I'll be glad to practice every day. So practicing, obviously, is a really important thing. But here's some of your teachers, some of your players. But here's another little thing to hang your hat on with practicing. How many 15-minute segments in a day? A little math there. 96. 96 15-minute segments on a day. Now, how many of those segments do we spend doing this? Yeah, a lot, right? So think, okay, I tell my young guys, give me 3 of those 96 to practice the trumpet, you know? Because what's the hardest thing about practicing the trumpet? Opening the case. That's the hardest. That's the hardest thing, right? But you get your horn out, put it, hey, I kind of like this, it's kind of fun. Oh, I got 15 minutes before dinner, bam, you know? So I would say, think in terms, okay, 96 15-minute segments in a day? Really? So you got to maybe up that practice time. So I tell my students, you know, I shoot for the top of the hill. And if I get halfway, then where would I have gotten if I just shot for halfway up the hill? So I'll shoot for 3 hours a day. Very seldom do I get 3 hours a day in practicing, but I shoot for that, you know. So try to up that practice time in terms of segments of 15 minutes. That's kind of an amazing number. 96 15-minute segments in a day. That's a lot, right? So I bet you could get 4 or 6 or 8 of those segments, right, to put on your horn, right? So, all right. So let's see. Where was I going with that? Practicing stuff you can't do, right? All right. let's talk about tunes a little bit. As a jazz musician, we need to learn tunes. And if there's one person in this room who's a slow learner, that would be me. I am a really slow learner. I could not learn a tune to save my life when I was in North Texas. I was awful. And then, how many of you have trouble learning tunes? Okay. All right. I bet there's more people. Yeah. Clay back here said yeah, I had a hard time learning tunes. So I'll show you in like 5 minutes something that really helped me, because someone who's not a fast learner helped me learn tunes, because the tune vocabulary is really important. As we're going to be jazz musicians, we got to start to learn some of the tunes to get to play. And I know a lot of tunes now, and I couldn't remember a tune for anything when I was in college and younger. But I learned how to learn a tune. And one of the great things, I had a bass player. He was a saxophone player, not a very good one. Come on in, guys. How are you? Can we just shut that door, though? It's okay. Thank you. So he was a saxophone player, but then he started playing bass, and he'd been playing bass about 2 weeks. And I said, we're going to play All Things You Are. I said, do you need a sheet? And he goes, no, I don't. And I was like, really? And he said, no, I got it. So, and then he played a solo, this tune. Right? So his solo sounded like this. I'll never forget it. Right? And I was like, what in the world have you been doing? He said, the roots are my melody. The roots are my melody. So I learned that's a really simple melody, right? That's only the root melody of one song, All Things You Are. So I went, wow. And he said, that's my melody. Now we can go take that step further and work in the numbers and all that stuff, okay? So the root melody is really important. So here's what I do when I work on a tune. And I'm just going to be real quick with this. I didn't intend to get to this, but it might help. 2 things to remember about a tune. The number of the first chord and the number of the first note in the key. Don't say, oh, it starts on G, because that's not necessarily the case, You know that old joke about the alto player, he comes to sit in, and the piano player says, what do you want to play? And he says, I'd like to play Body and Soul. And he says, well, what key do you do it in? And the piano player says, I like to do it in F sharp. Where's that put the alto? And the alto player says, back in the case. You don't want to be that guy. You want to say, okay, it starts, okay, I'm okay, You have you have a fighting chance if you know the first chord and the first note by number, okay? That's really important. In this case, All Things You Are, the first chord is the 6th chord, and the melody starts on the tonic. So we're in A flat. Right? So that's really important. So if we're in the key of G, the first chord is going to be 6. E, and the first note is going to be G, right? Now you know, right? So then, those two things, then you learn the root melody. Then you start to spell the chords. Now, if you can't spell chords yet, that's going to hang you up. Now, we spell chords in Charlier and in Bota and Botza and all those other exercises that I don't work enough on, We spell chords. You look at those chord spellings, Bach spelled chords like crazy, right? So get to know your chords. Get to know your triads and your 7th chords, because it's not very much. It's not, if you look at an old tune, or, generally look at a tune, there's 4 kinds of chords in a tune: major, dominant, minor, and half diminished. Those are the main 99% of the chords, right? Times 12, right? 48 different chords that you need to know how to spell on your horn, right? We as trumpet players, sometimes we know our theory skills, but we can't spell it on the horn. Guitar players are just the opposite. I used to have this little kid, this little guy, his name was Jason, of course, and he was a really good little guitar player. And I said, Jason, play me A flat half diminished. Boom, and I said, show me another one. I like this one. Bam, I said, show me one more. Yeah, this is a cool one. Boom. I said, what notes are in there? He goes, I have no idea. Right? Because he knew the shape, he knew where those chords are, but he didn't know how to spell that chord, right? We, if we've had some theory, we can spell a chord on paper, but to play it on our horns, what? So you've got to get in there and we've got to learn how to spell these chords on the horn. So fast forward, I've worked on my chords, and then I take this song here. Right? So you can kind of hear the chords going by. Now, that's not really exciting, but I can make music out of that. 3, 4. You hear the chords kind of going by, okay? So don't let it push you around. Learn the roots, learn how to spell those chords, right? Then the next thing, put it in some other keys. That's a little bit more of a challenge. But there's some things that kind of hang your hat from somebody who really had a hard time learning tunes, okay? How are we doing? Okay, I want to open it up for some questions, and then I'll have some other things. But I just want to give you a little break and get, if you're tired of listening to me yip up here. Yes?
Speaking of getting pushed around, I heard Bobby Shue say an interesting thing a couple years ago about when he's playing over a rhythm section that's not swinging, he plays in a way that makes them swing. And I'm kind of wondering how to do that.
Boy,
You were speaking about the groove, and if you're playing with maybe a less experienced rhythm section, you have some tips and tricks that you use to get it to where you want to be?
well, it depends on how much time you have, you know. I mean, if it's a student and you're working with them as students, or you're on the gig, and if I'm on the gig and it's not swinging, I play a lot of bossa novas, you know. Let's do Stella as a bossa nova. Yeah. So, but if I'm working with students, yeah, actually I do. Well, that gets into a whole other can of worms, but make sure that the quarter notes lined up, you know. Like the bass player's playing the ride cymbal, or his sound is disappearing into the ride cymbal, and the ride cymbal's disappearing into the tip, the point on the bass. That's imperative. So you got a quarter note. Just get them to play quarter notes, you know. And no bass drum on 2. Maybe they want a feather on 4, right? And then a hi-hat on 2 and 4. So that kind of thing, right? You get that going. But just bang, gang, because quarter notes can really swing. Listen to Sweets Edison. I mean, quarter notes can really swing. So that doesn't have to spang-lang. It can just be, but that quarter note has to line up with the bass. So if you're talking about students, you can get that to really line up, right? And then get them to learn how to do what they call the skip beat or whatever, the spang-lang, because that's really the heart of the swing, you know. So that to me is, and also I really feel strongly about having students, I do it all the time, tap my foot on 1 and 3. I know that sounds weird, but when I got on Basie's band, I looked around, everybody's tapping their foot on 1 and 3, I was like, wow, that's weird. But they were, because 1 and 3 are half notes. So you're thinking, go, 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 get the big, big, oh, ding, oh, oh, big, 2 and 4 is where the accents are, but get them tapping on 1 and 3. That really helps, because it just holds everything, it grounds everything, okay? So those are some things I would do with youngsters, you know, and then also when the piano player, when he's comping, not to land on, to anticipate, and the drummer should give you a lot of and to 4s, you know, yeah. In this music, Kenny Drew said one time, in jazz, 1 is actually the and to 4, so it's, you know, anticipated. So those are, but I mean, there's a whole thing, a lot of things in rhythm section. Yeah, it's hard to make a rhythm section swing, but with students, there's ways to kind of get it going. Yeah, yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of a two-part question. First, can you speak a little bit to your daily practice session in terms of what you work on? So you work on vocabulary every day, just to kind of, you know, what you practice every day, and then some other styles of languages that maybe are really good work on outside, just maybe swing and bebop language?
Sure. Yeah. Well, let's address the first one.
Sure.
You were talking about what do I practice?
Yeah, in terms of just vocabulary,
Uh-huh.
day in, day out, just to keep it fresh. And,
Yeah. I don't work on, I'm not a real pattern guy, you know. I work on things that help my ears, and I found that it kind of eventually makes its way into my playing. Not tonight, you know, necessarily. You'll hear players, I hear it with young players quite a bit, where they take a breath and they want to put this thing in that they've been working on. So it's like, boom, and they plug in that 4 bars of the Kenny Durham solo, which is great. That's fine. I mean, that's the way we learn a language, just like learning a different language, right? But a side note, Pancho would understand this. A lot of Texans, I'm from Texas, so I can say this. If we try to speak Spanish, it's with a Texas accent. Right? Which is not respectful, right? That's like playing jazz and not having the right groove, right? Same thing. So when you're working on that, you know, always keep that groove in there so you can speak the language with a respectful accent, right? So, but I work on short little things. Another thing I work on are 5-1 resolutions, okay? Not 2-5-1, just 5-1, okay? I'll give you one example. It's real easy. It's just a chord spelling on a dominant chord. I have my students just to get started, at G7, our G7, just G augmented. And then, sorry. Right? So that's just a little splash, a little dominant splash to get you home. And if you'll study, the master of that was Kenny Durham. He could just splash home anytime he wanted to. And it was just beautiful. So, God bless you. So, one of the finalists last night, his name's David Schneider. I know his dad. His dad's a great trumpet player too. He's really worked on that Kenny Durham 5-1 splashes, you know. So I would work on those 5-1. Find some things, if you're transcribing or something, find some things that you like, how people get home. Finding ways to get home. 5-1. Little ones, because if you plug in those long ones, they sound a little contrived to me. But if you can get into trouble and then splash home, right? You're good. So that's one thing I do work on in terms of vocabulary, just ways to get home, you know. So. I'm home. You know, I kind of find little ways to go against the grain, then get home. So that's something that I really work on. And then I do work on things I can't do for my ear, and I've found that just kind of gets my ear a little closer to being able to play what I'm hearing. Now, that's another thing. If you can play everything you're hearing, I think you're not hearing enough. I think Coltrane, who to me is the patron saint of vocabulary, I think he was hearing past what he could play too. You know, I think you should always be hearing more than what you can play. That's what I think. And the way to get there, the way to get to where you're playing more what you hear, I think is to work on chords and scales. Because you start to hear better. Not that you're going to plug in these licks, but that you get to hear better. Your ears get better. I didn't have great ears. I mean, my ears are okay. They're not stupendous, you know. But they've gotten better. So, and I think this made me a better teacher. If I, you know, sometimes somebody has great ears, they're like, "Well, can't you hear that?" No, I couldn't hear it, you know. When I was in school, I was a theory major. And I'd look over, and my friend over there's balancing his checkbook while I'm sweating bullets on this test, you know. And I think, oh man, I'm in the wrong business here, you know. So, but my ears got better. And working on things you can't do, I think your ears get better. And then but then you start to hear more, you know. So but that is some things I do. Specifically, I work on 5/1 gestures, and then I still work on scales and chords, and you know, I don't work on specific patterns or very much anymore. And I do transcribe. I do it a little differently. I find little snippets that I like, and I'll put it in every key. But I have my students transcribe entire solos. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how do you, in terms of like structure in your studio, we know Vince DiMartino's got a 4-year, every 2 weeks you have an assignment that you can know it long in advance, and that's what you have to play. You go through that whole series for undergraduate study. How do you approach like that kind of structure? It seems like with jazz, you can go in so many different directions.
Yeah.
How do you maintain that?
Well, that would go back to his other question. I'm sorry, back in the back there, I didn't answer your second, and I would address. He asked about the bebop language. I feel like the bop language is sort of the common ground, and when you think of the great players like Train, Miles, all the guys that really went further and further and further, they all went through that bebop thing, and I'm sure that. I know for a fact that like Chick Corea did and Herbie Hancock did. So I feel like we can't jump over the music. We got to go through the music. So I do think working on bebop and before is really important to get the language. I don't consider myself really a bebop player, but I do work on that. I really do. I try to know as many Charlie Parker tunes as I possibly can, and I try to work on his language. That's not the way I play, but I work on that. So that's one of the things I really have my guys work on bop language. And I like my guys to kind of find their way, find their own voice. So I'm not saying they should be bop players, but I do think they need to hang their hat on that, yes. And a lot of it's trumpets up. So I have a curriculum and I kind of follow loosely. We get to where we're working on Coltrane, giant steps, we're working on kind of hard changes, and I feel like when you work on a really hard tune, you kind of embrace a lot of easier tunes. So we do work on harder tunes, and I like them to write. I like them to write contrafacts. Everybody know what a contrafact is? A tune on other tunes, on the changes of other tunes. I have them do that. Sometimes I'll have them write. I don't have them write solos too much, but I had a lesson one time with Fred Hirsch, great piano player, and he told me that's something he does is has his students write out solos. I'd like to insert this right there, and that's kind of a good exercise. So I try different things. I'm still trying to get better,
Would you ever have students work on etudes?
Yes. Oh yeah.
To work on tone?
Oh sure, yeah. Yeah, I have them do Charlie. Yeah, I have them do Charlier, and yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean. I'm not going to play with Jim Thompson Rock Across the Hall. You're not going to hear me playing the Haydn. I'm not going to hear that. No, you're not. I'm not going to do it. But no, we do that a lot. We work on especially etudes. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and tonguing and yeah, because got to be good trumpet players. Sure. Yeah.
You're talking a lot about motion, like motion 5/1, motion of group melodies.
Uh huh.
Motion in rhythm land. Like sometimes I find myself just trying to play a lot of eighth notes.
Sure.
Which is so boring.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I try to be pretty rhythmic because my vocabulary is, I can't play all eighth notes. So yeah, I get tired of guys when they play all eighth notes. And the bop era was a lot of eighth notes. So yeah, it's hard to get away from that. But I think in terms of if a drummer played all eighth notes on a solo, that would be so boring. So I tell my guys to think like a drummer. Think like a drummer would play. And I have some rhythm exercises that we do, some clave rhythms and things like that we do. Yeah, but I like to think in those terms. A good comparison is like a Lenny Tristano, and I love Lenny Tristano, but a lot of his songs are all eighth notes, right? So if you clap their rhythm, what song is that? Right? But if you clap the rhythm to a monk tune, Blue Monk, right? So you can tell a monk tune a mile away just from the rhythm. So why not be that way as a soloist? So yeah, rhythm is everything to me. I work on rhythm a lot. Yeah, that's a great question. But that kind of gets into the what to play. And so I haven't addressed that too much in here by design. But yeah, listen to great drummers and rhythmic players, yeah. That opens up a whole new thing, you know. And you don't have to have, you know, Coltrane vocabulary. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Do you ever work on, like, if you're in like a big band setting, you have like a set amount of bars you have to do. You ever work on like planning out phrasing and like the general structure of a solo, or do you just kind of go for it?
I'm sorry.
Do you ever work on like if you have an extended solo,
Yeah.
like how to phrase it?
Sure.
As opposed to just doing it all at once and then just kind of rambling?
Well, I try to think in terms of, you know, there's a lot of ways that composers, and that was kind of my next thing I was going to talk about. There's a lot of ways that composers kind of set themselves up. Some are through composed, you know what that means? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, and then some guys, they think in terms of like sonata allegro form, you know, where you have a theme and variations, right, basically, right? So, and then some are more like a story where you have like a character and a character and a character, and you try to develop those characters and have them have some kind of interrelationship and not bringing a character in the last 2 pages of the story, you know, but keep it, you know. And so I kind of think in those terms generally. It's probably a mixture of those things, and I'm sure I deviate. But I like to think of myself as more of a story kind of a person in terms of my playing. I like to stick with my ideas more, because if I think through composed, I start to play the same all the time, and I don't want to play the same all the time. I want to give my chance. So I like solos. Every once in a while, I play a solo, and it makes a little sense, and I'll take that chance that 5 other solos aren't that good, because I don't want to play the same all the time. So that's kind of helped me. But I have to kind of deviate sometimes from that, you know, because I make a lot of mistakes and stuff, you know. But yeah, that's kind of the way I set that up. It kind of goes with my compositional thing that was going to be my next thing. Any other questions so far? We can come back. Let's just go to this next thing at the bottom here. It says elements of sound and compositional tools. One of the things I tell my students, Pancho, we'll see you. Bless you. See you guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
One of the things I tell my guys is be compositional when you play. Be compositional when you play. And that involves a whole lot of other fun stuff. And I want you to look at this little thing at the bottom. It says compositional tools, elements of sound, but they're actually compositional tools that you can start to incorporate in your improvisations / compositions that have nothing to do with the what. They have to do with the how. Okay? And this is a living, growing list for you. And I suggest you draw those 4 things. I have one in my book, that it's always growing. When we talk about pitch, what are we talking about? I'll get you started. Melody, harmony, intervals, intonation, tessitura. Everybody know what that means? Okay. Range. What's something else in pitch? Tone could have something to do with pitch, you're right. So there's no real wrong answers and a lot of cross-references. What else? How about vibrato? Pitch, right? Inflection, absolutely. Mutes could have something to do with pitch, right? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's never ending. Look at the next one, duration. What does that mean? Well, it can mean form, or it can mean rhythm, or it can mean articulation, right? It just goes on and on. There's so many attributes that you can start to use as a soloist, and it makes you more compositional instead of thinking, what the heck do I play on this G7? You know, there's so many more things in music than the what. There's got to think about the how we're playing. A good example is Miles Davis, I think, because he left lots of space. He played really simple a lot of the time, and he played all kinds of different inflections and sound, and it's beautiful. And it was very compositional, right? Volume. What does that entail? Help me out. Dynamics. articulation, instrumentation, orchestration, accents, vibrato, could be a pulsating vibrato, right? Groove, right? It just goes on and on. Then look at the fourth one, timbre. That would be tone, tone on your horn, tone with mutes, tone of your brass quintet, tone. I mean, it just goes on. You get my point? So there's so many fun things that we can put in our solos that make them more interesting. So if I'm playing All Things You Are, okay, too many eighth notes. Okay, that's too many eighth notes, right? Now, if somebody can't do that, I'll have them work on that, just relentless eighth notes. But, oh, man, I get tired of that quick. Don't you? Yeah, thank you. Man, right? All the same volume. Why so loud all the time, right? More interesting, more compositional, okay? So you get my point. With all these things, bring these things into your playing and be compositional improvisers. Instead of thinking, oh my goodness, it's so daunting, I got to learn all these scales and all these chords and all these tunes and that guy, That stuff comes along. It's really important, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the how to be better jazz musicians. And I think it's important. I've brought up Jim Thompson a lot. I love Jim Thompson. And Jim is not a jazz player at all, but he's very aware of the fact that in orchestras in the future, a lot of times, orchestra in the trumpet section, they'll have a principal player, maybe a solo player, maybe somebody can play lead on a Pops concert, and somebody that can stand up and sound like Louis Armstrong or Sweets Edison, right? And if you can do that, then you're going to be more liable to get that gig, right? He really is very supportive of the jazz thing. He's very respectful of it. But he thinks he wants his students to be not jacks of all trade, but versatile and musical. I'm not saying be a jack of all trade, but I think it's really important to be able to stand up and not sound silly like I'm speaking a language with a Texas accent, That's the worst, And standing up and playing a solo and not having the right inflection is sort of the same thing. So Jim's really respectful and supportive of that. So that's what we're talking about today, just being aware of the how to do things, right? Not just the what. The vocabulary is a continuing thing. I'm working on it all the time. I get so tired of my vocabulary. That's okay, But the how is the fun part. And you can do that really fast if you just do some study and record yourself, and be honest with, is that swinging? Maybe not. So listen to yourself and see if it's being more authentic, okay? Questions? Yeah.
How do you deal with like trust? You have to trust your rhythm sections. You talk about dynamics. You talk about all this stuff. What if you feel like you've got a rhythm section that's just not listening to you or supporting you, not playing dynamics, they're not listening to you, they're not giving you what you need? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's tough.
Travel.
Yeah. That's a good, we used to joke about playing with Jamie, and I love Jamie Aebersold, and I love his stuff. And the great thing about Jamie Aebersold, those guys, they don't drink too much, they don't get tired of your playing, They're right there, yeah, they're right there with you, But, you just, try to play with guys that are listening, and if they're not, try to communicate, You know, a great statement by Thelonious Monk. There was a guy named Steve Lacy who played with Monk, and Lacy went to Monk and he said, "What can I do? What can I do to be a better player?" And Monk looked at him and he said, "Make the drummer sound good." Right? Now you're not going to make that drummer sound good if you're playing continuously, or you're not leaving any space, or you're playing all eighth notes. But if you play a rhythm and leave some space, and he jumps in there, he's going to be swinging more. And you're going to be swinging more because space creates groove. Space creates depth of groove. So work on leaving some space. Put a period on your sentences, or a question mark, or an exclamation, some kind of punctuation. And that a lot of times helps the rhythm section play better. I thought that was a very selfless thing, you know. Make the because if we think like this, oh, me and my playing, and you know, we get worried like that, especially as trumpet players. We get to thinking, oh, me, my playing, my career, me. It should be more of a giving thing, don't you think? I think so. When I'm real self-involved, I don't play very well. But if I'm thinking in terms of trying to express some joy, I tend to play better. It's more of a giving thing. Yeah.
So what you're saying about versatility, do you think it's important today to have, I guess, like a mission statement or a direction solely as a player? Because especially a lot of times I think as like younger players who become trumpets, it's always like be versatile, you gotta be able to do everything.
Yeah.
And stuff like that.
Well, it kind of goes back to my thing about having depth. I think especially with young players, you guys gotta, if you're really serious about being a trumpet player, I think you gotta do everything: concert band, orchestra, brass quintet, jazz band, small group, solos, everything. Right? And that goes to equipment too. You don't want to be playing equipment that doesn't match the situation. You know, have you been in that room with all those trumpets? There's a lot of equipment. You know, so with equipment, I remember Snooky used to say, you know, he played the sound mouthpiece all his whole life. You know, so I'd say don't change around equipment too much. Be able to be pretty versatile on you know, a little bit of equipment, maybe a little bit different mouthpieces or something. But I'd say for young people especially, it's really important to be versatile. Me, I'm much more specialized because really by necessity, because I wasn't as good a classical player as some guys. You know, I'm not Al Vizzuti, nowhere close. It was funny. One of the first times I ever heard Vizzuti, Vinny DiMartino introduced him. I reminded him of this. This was funny about 25 years ago, and he introduced him. He said, "This is one of the greatest drum players I've ever heard." He said, "There's 4 or 5 things I like about Al Vizzuti." He said, first of all, he's a really nice guy, and the second thing, he's an incredible trumpet player. You know, and he said the third thing is, it's really great about him is there's only one of him. And the fourth thing is he doesn't live anywhere near me. I reminded him of that, you know. So, I mean, this has been a blessing for me because I really didn't know Vinny, but I've never heard of him all my life. You know, we've crossed paths, but we didn't know each other. And we've gotten to know each other this week. It's been really great. He's did you hear him last night? He's just like, wow, what a trumpet player, right? Wow, he's so efficient. I told him I need a lesson, you know. Man, I wish I was so efficient as that. So, but did that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think it's really important for young people to be really versatile and learn how to be musical in those versatile situations.
It's
Yeah.
important at the end of the day to like know who you are as a player. Though, like maybe if you came up as a jazz player, like you maybe like started learning your fundamentals of your class players. Is it important to like stay true? Like what do you think is your sound? Or?
I think it's really important to be versatile and learn how to be musical in every situation. There's a young man back in the back here, John Raymond. He's a wonderful trumpet player, and he sounds like John Raymond when he plays. Wow, his music is beautiful, and I feel like he's kind of found his spot. But I bet John, I bet you were a good classical player, right? Yeah, right. You worked on that stuff. Where'd you go to school?
I went to school, my undergrad in Eau Claire, Wisconsin.
Okay.
And then I got a master's at SUNY Purchase.
Oh, it's SUNY Purchase in jazz, though. Yeah, but I mean, Eau Claire, you were studying with Baca, right? Yep. And you were working on Charliette. Yeah, so I think that's paid off. I think being versatile is really, really important, especially on trumpet, because you've got to be a good darn trumpet player to be a good jazz player. You just do. I don't think you could argue that. Snooky Young was a very good trumpet player, and he practiced a lot, and he worked on Schlossberg. He'd wear you out with Schlossberg. I practiced with him. He'd wear you out with Schlossberg, and he was very picky about it. So yeah, I think it's very important to be versatile and learn how to be musical in every situation, because jazz is not bop now, and it's really special. It's more world music now, and we are required to play all kinds of music now. So, and we got to be really good trumpet players to do that. So I think that's really important to be versatile. You'll find your spot, and it might change. Miles Davis changed 10 times during his career. Dizzy Gillespie sort of played the same his whole career over different grooves, but Miles changed so much. So, you have license to change, but to be a good trumpet player, I think is really important. How are we doing? You guys about tired of hearing me? Yep, up here. Any other questions? Yeah.
What's a newfound belief or habit in the past 5 or 10 years that you think has made the most positive change for you?
Wow. Yeah, it's well, that's an interesting thing, because I'm still trying stuff, Let's see. I went to a workshop or a Masterclass at the Gen Convention this last year, and Brad Good. Everybody know who Brad Good is? I think Brad went to school here. He studied with Vinny, right? Yeah. Brad and I, we're totally different styles players, but he's a virtuoso. He plays circles around me. He could play the trumpet now. Sorry. Oh, it's the boss. That's going to be on film. All good. I was just kidding, honey. Yeah. Anyway, but Brad, Brad talked a lot about healing and pedagogy and some things that kind of shored some things up for me in terms of the trumpet. I'd been taught, like I told you, I studied with Jimmy Stamp, and I studied with these, and a lot of them said incredible things, and a lot of them talked about being firm here, like Jimmy Stamp used to say, take a nibble, make sure you touch small aperture, firm here, and I always tell my students, it's not like being an athlete, it is being an athlete. We've got to be strong here. Malcolm McNabb, really told me this needs to be supple, and this needs to be firm. And one thing Brad said in his talk the other day was he thinks pedagogically we've missed some things. He really feels like this needs to be strong, and that really has helped me. I've called him up and I said, wow, that was so, I'm so glad I heard that. I'd heard things like that before, but he really firmed it up for me. And so I feel like my plan has gotten a little stronger, and I'm a little more confident because, instead of pushing here, trying to make this stronger, I'm trying to make this stronger. Just that little thing, right? Right? Just a little thing, but that really helped me a lot. So, but in other things, I'm just continually trying to learn and get better. I listen a lot, and I'm trying to. And I don't know if you heard those. How many of you heard those kids play yesterday? Holy cow! There were 10 jazz guys in the semifinals, and they were all so good. And you've heard some of the other young kids. We were talking today. They're just they're so mumuch better than we were when, it's no comparison, I promise you. These kids play much better than I did when I went out on the road with the band. They play much better. I'm not kidding. Way better. It's scary. So all 10 of them, 2 of them were my students, and it was so good for them to hear these guys. They were all 10 of them beautiful players. So I'm glad I wasn't judging, Man, that was tough. So, yeah. What were we addressing there? I forgot. Jamie, help me out. What were we talking about? Life. It's been so great. I mean, Jamie and I are old friends. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Been here. So it's, yeah, but, I know, we were talking about things that have helped so much, you know. I think it's more small things, but just as that just general, I mean, I'm 64, and I feel like I'm just kind of getting started in a lot of ways. And Brad said something about that, and I thought, man, that makes a lot of sense, you know, and it helped me out, you know. So keep it up, keep learning, right? Maybe we ought to stop there today. So thank you. You've been so respectful. I hope it was helpful. Thank you. Thank you.